Eddie's Vega. Eddie was born and raised among the chicharras of the Rio Grande Valley in deep South Texas. As a nationally recognized poet and spoken word artist, Eddie has competed in regional and national poetry slams since 2015. His poems have appeared in various publications on Via San Antonio buses and graphically displayed on downtown San Antonio walls and windows. Welcome, Eddie.
I apologize for being late. There was a traffic jam at Buc-ee's. The first poem, and this is the poem that inspired the book and was really inspired here in Austin. Happened something in Austin when I was with some high school kids and and their teachers, and we spent a week together. And this one lady kept complaining about a lot of stuff, and she wasn't from Texas, so it kind of got annoying. And anyhow, but then I changed. I made it San Antonio specific, so I changed the name of the location. So when I say Medina Lake, I actually mean Lake Travis. But I memorized it as Medina Lake, so I'm sorry, I'm probably going to say Medina Lake. All right. I knew that there was something about her. Something about the way in which she talked. Something about that look in her eye. Something about that way, that California way in which she saw the world. And then after a week of spending time together, we sat on camp chairs with a group of people overlooking Medina Lake. And she said something. Man, she said something that just confirmed why it was that I just didn't like her. This time it was the chicharras that pissed her off. She said, oh my God, that noise, how can you stand and live here around that constant noise? I said, listen, woman. In my head, of course, because my mother taught me never to speak to any lady like that. But out loud I did say to her these things. I said, that noise is a chicharra, or cicada to your people. It's a soundtrack to every summer that I've known. It's a sound that tells me that I'm home. It's a sound that reminds me of sitting at my grandmother's table eating pan dulce and drinking orange soda. Sound that reminds me of my parents' screen door snapping back because I've gone outside to take a ride around the neighborhood. Sound that reminds me of convincing my little cousins to pick those chili piquins from my grandmother's salsa and then watch when they rub the sweat from their eyes and they start to cry. You gotta get really close to stop the chicharra. So I knew that as long as it was chirping, el cucuy was not coming. It was the last sound that we heard before plunging into the pool under an August sun, and the first sound that we heard when our water released our ears from its captivity. It was there every morning when I walked 4 blocks to Woodrow Wilson Elementary. It was there during a game of freeze tag, when the Lamar Boxers middle school football team lost their last chance to score a touchdown. For the entire season, it was the only sound louder than any of their sobs. In high school, when I stood at attention during 2-a-day band practice, it was the only sound louder than my heartbeat. Rachel Jackson had these great green eyes and auburn hair. She had long mastered that Texas twang. She said, Eddie Vega, I'm gonna knock you upside the head if you don't ask me out. When I stood outside her door waiting to pick her up for homecoming, it was the only sound louder than my heartbeat. It's a sound that inspired accordion music and chancla dancing and cruising down military, waving down the raspa truck, holding hands with your Christian Woodlawn Lake on the 4th of July, and of course, barbacoa and Big Red on a Saturday morning. It's a sound that says that a Whataburger with cheese and jalapenos was always kicking it out ass. And we don't wear sweaters on our beaches. And that other team that got lucky this year, the Spurs will be back this season. And when Fiesta ends, the party's just getting started because summer lasts forever. And we've got a tube for the cooler this year. And we're going to float our troubles away down a cold, cold river. And the chicharras are going to be there all along the banks, the soundtrack of our summer. So, ¿sabes qué? Get up off that capture, girl, and go back to California. Because this is the sound that reminds me that I am a son of South Texas. And shoot, there ain't nothing else that I'd rather be. All right, so the book is called Chicharra Chorus because she helped me realize that the chicharras are always been in my life, and I didn't really listen for them because they're always there, right? So you kind of they're always in the background, and you forget that they're always in the background. So there are chicharras that kind of appear here and there throughout the book, and I don't mean that literally, although there are some literal chicharras in the book, but there are the word appears throughout in different ways, and this is one of those ways. And this poem, about my time with my grandmother. It's called Cleaning Beans. We sat together at the table at mid-morning, when the morning coolness would finally surrender to the heat of the rest of the day, and the chicharras continued their gossip chain about the bochorno. We sat together cleaning beans, or limpiando frijol. I helped my abuelita selfishly, sitting with my forearm sticking to the plastic table cover, assisting her with her discriminatory process. Slowly I became aware that she wasn't just picking out the rocks. With a look of disdain, she also extricated blacks and whites. With her delicately calloused fingers, she removed the broken, the wrinkled, the unrecognizable, leaving only the perfectly pure, the exquisitely pinto. The chosen ones that would be given their place of honor in the cazuela on that altar that we call the stove. She had a rhythm, grabbing a puño of beans, inspecting them, and then splashing them into the colander so they made the sound of a lone, complaining chicharra. I helped her so I could hear her stories, each one beginning with a familiar, ay, how your father loved that dog. Ay, tu tío era tan travieso. Ay, tu tías alegaron y alegaron y alegaron. Ay, tu abuelo se puso tan enojado. If you think I helped my abuelita in the kitchen just to be nice, thoughtful, because it was my duty as a resident grandchild, those would only be partial reasons. I cleaned beans, was paid in stories, and though beans are all I've got now, I've got plenty to tell. I think 2 more, 2, 3, whatever, depending on how long they're. Apparently an error occurred and I can't get to this poem. But I can get to this one. Okay, so this is an age where we are talking a lot about immigration, and I'm from the border, and I don't live there now. I live in San Antonio, but I still have friends at the border and family at the border. So, anyhow. The northern Mexican, or norteño, is known for having a dry, wry sense of humor. My tío Manuel is one of these Mexicans. He was trying to console me as my arm was in a cast for the 3rd time in my teenage years, proving once and for all that I was not athletic. Hey, mijo, I had this friend. He broke his arm, and for 6 months lo tenía así en un sling. But it was okay porque tocaba la guitarra and he could still, make money. Tío Manuel lived with his wife at my grandma's house in Mexico on weekends, but on weekdays, he was building the road to Robstown. Then one day, he and Tia Lupe came to stay at our house, and before I knew about immigration laws, understood that I lived on a border, or knew the term anchor baby, my prima was born. They went back to Mexico. Tia Lupe quit her job as a school teacher to raise their daughter. Meanwhile, Tío Manuel was building the road to Kingsville. They saved up enough to buy land, and before I knew what a colonia was, realized that most neighborhoods in America actually had paved streets, they built a house. They had another daughter. And Tío Manuel was building the road to Corpus Christi that year. I get nervous shaking my Tío Manuel's hands. Really, they're just one great big rough hand, really one great big callus, developed from years of dealing with bosses demanding a faster pace. A South Texas sun that never quits, and the ignorance of people who can sit, claiming the American dream is being stolen while immigrants stand to make it possible. He was the Mexican labor force that built his own house, installed the doors that welcomed every hungry relative, installed windows from where my cousins could see and dream of a world beyond the walls that their father built. He instilled values, invented stories, insisted that despite the hardships, we take time to tell jokes about broken arm guitarists. And the only thing broken in that house is his English. He fixed the pipes, fixed the wires, the cabinets, fixed his own status. I feel guilty clasping his hands. They got that way from picking up picks and shovels. All I ever pick up are pens and expo markers. Compared to him, I haven't done shit to earn my place in this world that he put together, all because I had the fortune of being born on this side of the river. He built the road to your hunting lease. He built the road that takes you to spring break on Port A. And when I say he paved the way for his daughters to go to the University of Texas, I mean that literally. Somewhere along his journey, he also made his own pathway to citizenship. And Mr. President, in this particular case, you're right. Mexico doesn't send their best. Because my Tío Manuel, my Tia Lupe, my father came each of their own accord. And I'll be damned if you say they're anything but Americans. All right, and I guess kind of sticking with this bicultural theme. This last poem, this is last one in the book, so if you want to actually read more than once just by hearing of it, it's there. And I'm sorry, there was we never talked about like cussing or anything, but I just did it, so we're cool with it? All right, I might do it again. All right. We're all adults. All right. What, mainly? Yeah? Okay, good. That was your warning. I was at the poetry workshop. Cuando les leí mi poesía. It was this poem sprinkled with words in Spanish like chili powder on the fresh fruit slices of my English. When they told me, maybe you should translate more of your words. Not everyone can understand them. So I told them, I didn't write this poem for you. So don't ask me to change it for you. You see, I spoke Spanish before I spoke anything else. And when my father was learning English in the classroom, I was learning it from my mom and Sesame Street. So maybe this poem is for Big Bird, a Cookie Monster, and Oscar, who taught me it's okay to get mad, especially when you're being misunderstood. You see, I wrote this poem for my mom and her generation, who were punished in classrooms, made to kneel in corners, their mouth washed out with soap for speaking their mother's tongues. I wrote it for my dad, who was proud when the white lady told him she couldn't believe he was an immigrant because he hardly had an accent. I wrote it for my daughter, who with that analytical mind gets top marks in math and science but struggles in Spanish class. I wrote it for my son, who asked me in disappointment, Daddy, why didn't you teach me Spanish when I was younger? I would know 2 languages by now. And I wrote it because when I was their age, I pretended I didn't understand the janitors and the lunch ladies at school because none of my GT classmates would ever have talked to those people. So now I'm going to write it for them. And their daughters and their sons, y my tíos, y toda la gente de mi barrio, quienes trabajan en la labor to pick the lettuce and tomato that goes into your taco salad. Maybe it's for the Salinas out there who can sing como la flor, but don't actually know the language in which they sing. And for Hispanics in Hollywood who are still typecast as gang members and pool cleaners and janitors and lunch ladies. And for the Chavo del Ocho, Univision 41. All 48 restaurants in the greater metropolitan area with the name Jalisco somewhere in there. Los 43 de Ayotzinapa whose bodies still have not been found. 12.8 million Latinos that did not vote in the last election. And the 30% of Border Patrol agents out there who claim themselves as Hispanic, keeping their own cousins in cages, but I sure as hell didn't write it for you. It's for anyone who's been laughed at for saying sandwich, library, or pizza, had their name butchered by some pinche gringo who didn't even want to try because there's no excuse for that. It's for being told to speak American on this soil, where we rolled tortillas before we ever broke any bread, and there was a Santa Fe before there was Plymouth Rock. There was an El Paso before there was Philadelphia, and there was a San Antonio before there was ever a Washington, D.C. And they did not write this poem for you either, Mr. Trump. I wrote it for me. Thank you.